Okay, chapter 10, we're going to start with the first of our market structures, and this is pure competition. We're going to look at it in the short run. Okay, and so there's going to be four market models that we are going to study, and on one end, it's pure competition. This is what we will start with, and then we will do the other extreme, which is pure monopoly, and then we will finish with monopolistic competition and oligopoly as well. This is a very good chart to look at. And I would save this chart and refer to it over and over again. This is the similarities and differences between the four market models. So we have pure competition, and we see that we have a large number of firms, a standardized product, so the good is the same. So let's, for example, assume they're only producing like soybeans or just the iPhone, etc. Okay, there's no differentiation, and because of this, the firms do not have any control over price, because there are so many firms selling the same product that not one firm has control over the price, and it is very easy to enter the market. Also, there's really no non-price competition, meaning, there's no, because the product is the same, they don't need to, for example, advertise. There's not competition between the other firms in terms of trying to differentiate their product. If one farmer is selling soybeans and then the next farmer is selling soybeans, soybeans are soybeans, it's the same product, so they don't need to try to spend money in advertising to convince consumers that their soybeans are better than the other guy's soybeans. And so, like we've been saying in examples, agriculture, an orange is an orange, apple is an apple, etc. That's one extreme. Let's jump over to monopoly. We see that monopoly is just one firm with a unique product and no close substitutes. So they have pretty much full control over price. Conditions of entry, it's blocked. That's the reason why the firm is a monopoly to begin with, because there are high barriers to entry. So it's very tough for another firm to enter the market. And the non-price competition is just mainly just public advertising. And so, for example, would be a natural monopoly granted by the government for local utilities. We mentioned another chapter, it might be cheaper for one firm to service a whole town with electricity than it would be for two firms. And then we have monopolistic competition, which is a hybrid of pure competition and monopoly. So we have many products, and these products are differentiated. So it could be, for example, we have different types of cell phones. We have the iPhone, we have, Samsung, we have Nokia, etc. And so they have some control over price because the product is differentiated. They have some control over price, but within narrow limits, since it's still competing with other firms that are selling similar goods. It's, conditions of entry is easy, and there's a lot of non-price competition, since, again, these goods are differentiated. There's a lot of money spent on trying to convince that their differentiated product is better than the other guy's differentiated product. So, their cell phone is better than the other guy's cell phone, for example. And some more examples would be, like dresses, shoes, retail trade, etc. So most things that we buy in our daily lives, they're from this market structure, that we want: Adidas, Nike, Mizu, for example, Sasani shoes, etc. And then we have oligopoly, and this is when there's a few firms, and the product they provide could be standardized or differentiated. Like OPEC is, they provide oil in, several countries, but, that good is standardized. Or we can look at the video game industry. There's only a few consoles out there. We have like Nintendo, Xbox, for example, etc. There's only three or four. And so they could be just differentiated products. And control over price, and this is where an oligopoly can get a bit unethical. They can call each other and collude over price, basically agree on a price to sell. So airlines, for example, can, call each other and charge the same price for a flight, and that's illegal. But also, if they do that, then one of the airlines might cheat and lower the price to try to capture all of the business. And so there's a lot of incentives for some unethical behavior in oligopolistic structure. Conditions of entry, it's very hard to enter the market in an oligopoly. And there's a lot of non-price competition, especially when the product is differentiated. And so we have like the auto industry, steel, farm implements, etc. Okay, so pure competition, like we said earlier, the characteristics. There's a large number of sellers, and the good that they're selling is the same. So because of that, they are what we call price takers. And there's easy entry and exit in the long run for other firms. So, if the soybean market is having a positive profit in the short run, then more soybean farmers will enter the market in the long run. Or if it's not doing so well, then in the long run, they can easily exit. Okay, but I want you guys to remember that because there's a large number of sellers and the good is the same, okay, this causes these firms to be a price taker. If one soybean farmer tried to charge more for his soybeans than another one, he wouldn't get any business. He would just go to the other farmer and get the exact same product for less. And if one soybean farmer tried to charge a lower price than the other ones, what would happen is he would have so much demand, since he has the cheapest soybeans, that he would then have to increase his plant size, or his, you have to buy more land, hire more workers, so his costs will rise. And this would force them to increase his price back to what everyone else is charging for soybeans. Okay, since the market structure here is purely competitive, and the firms are all price takers, they have to charge the price that the market dictates. Their demand curve is perfectly elastic. They can't alter price. Again, they're price takers, not price makers. And so, they can supply as much or as little as they want at market price. And so what we see is that the demand curve is horizontal. Okay, so this is market price. So they can produce as much or as little as they want at market price. Okay, so last chapter we looked at costs. Now we're going to look at revenue. So average revenue is total revenue. And just to recap, total revenue is number of units sold times price per unit. So average revenue is total revenue divided by total number of units sold. And for a purely competitive firm, average revenue will equal the price. And marginal revenue is a change in total revenue that results when we provide an additional unit of, in this case, soybeans. Okay, let's look at our table. This should be quantity demanded, and this is price. Okay, then we have marginal revenue here. And total revenue here. Okay, total revenue again is price times Q. Okay. All right, so the market price dictated is $131. Let's say this is for a case of soybeans. And once again, because there's a large number of firms and the good is the same, this leads to the firms being a price taker. So they will supply what the market demands at the price of 131. So if it demands, you know, 4 cases of soybeans, they'll supply 4 cases of soybeans at 131. If it's 12, they'll supply 12 at $131, etc. All right, total revenue would be P times Q. So we could see over here, 1 times 131 is 131. 2 times 131 is 262, and so on. Okay. And we can graph total revenue, okay, on the graph over here. So here's total revenue. So, at 2 cases, total revenue is 262. At 4 cases, it's 524, and etc. Okay. And then marginal revenue, okay, is the change in total revenue from selling an additional unit. So what we see here is that since at all the units sold, price doesn't change, we're selling each additional unit at 131, then marginal revenue is also 131 at each unit too. So like if we look at change in, total revenue divided by change in units. So going from 0 to 1, change in total revenue was 131 for adding 1 unit. Going from 1 to 2, change in total revenue was 131, and then of course the number of units that were changed from 1 to 2 is just 1 unit. It's an additional unit. Okay, so this would also equal 131, and so on. So what we find is that price equals marginal revenue in a purely competitive firm. Okay, and we established earlier that average revenue also equals price. So price equals marginal revenue equals average revenue in a purely competitive firm. Okay, so the purely competitive firm is a price taker, so it can't change the price in order to reach profit maximization. So they need to ask 3 questions. Should we produce this product? And if the answer is yes, then how much of it should we produce? Okay, and what would be the economic profit or loss that will result? Remember, economic profit, okay, it's explicit costs, basically accounting profit, plus implicit costs. Okay, so here we have our table and they can decide. So total fixed cost is 100. Total variable cost, here we can see that it's increasing with output. Total cost would be total fixed cost plus total variable cost, for example. Total revenue, okay, would be P times Q. So the price again is 131. So it would be 131 times, for example, row 1 is 0, so total revenue would be 0. And then row 2 would be 1 times 131, so total revenue is 131. Okay. Over here, if they produce 2 units of output, total revenue would be 2 times 131, 262, and so on. And so we find profit or loss this way. We subtract total cost from total revenue. Okay, and so we see that the firm will realize an economic loss if they just produce, well, one, if they don't produce at all, or if they produce 1 unit or just 2 units. But starting with unit 3, it becomes an economic profit. But at which output would economic profit be highest? If you look at the chart, okay, we would see for unit 9 and 10. Okay. Let's add this on here since I cut it off over here. Okay, so we see economic profit is highest at output being 9 units. Okay, it's 299, and then if they produce 10 units, then their profit starts to drop. Okay, so we see here it's 299, and then the 10th unit, it drops to 280. So how would this look like on a graph? Okay, this is what it would look like on a graph. Let's add in the total cost curve. Okay. And total economic profit. Okay. Peaks here at 299. Okay. And the difference, okay, between total revenue line here and the total cost curve here, okay, the difference at unit 9 is the maximum economic profit of 299. Okay, so in the short run, we can also find profit maximizing output by looking at marginal revenue and marginal cost approach. Okay, so where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, or where at least the difference between the two of them is most minimized, is the profit maximizing output. So over here, okay, for output 1, marginal cost is much less than marginal revenue. We would produce more. Output 2, again, marginal cost is less than marginal revenue, so the firm knows to produce more. Output 3, marginal cost, again, is less than marginal revenue, so the firm will keep producing up until it reaches, okay, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and we see at unit 9, okay, it's almost pretty much the same, and that is also where our, okay, profit is maximized. Notice now, if we were to go to, if the firm was to produce unit 10, marginal cost would be higher than marginal revenue, and profit would decrease over here. Okay, so if marginal cost is less than marginal revenue, then the firm will keep on producing until they are equal. And if marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue, then the purely competitive firm would produce less until they are equal. And the profit maximizing condition is marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And what economic profit would look like for the purely competitive firm in the short run is over here. So let's draw some of our cost curves. Okay, let's start with marginal cost. Okay. Marginal revenue is over here. Okay. Remember, marginal revenue equals price in a purely competitive firm. Okay. And then we have our average total cost curve. And average variable cost curve. Okay, and so here, okay, so we see where marginal revenue equals marginal cost at this point over here. Okay, it's where the marginal revenue curve intersects the marginal cost curve. It is greater than our cost curve. It is higher than our cost curve. So this firm is earning an economic profit. Okay, so at unit 9, okay, what they're earning per unit sold is greater than the costs per unit sold. You can see here, this is the average total cost for 9 units, and this is what they're bringing in per unit, and since it's greater, we have an economic profit. Next, we're going to look at if there is a loss. Okay, let's look at the case where a purely competitive firm is not operating at a profit, but rather at a loss. So in this case, if the purely competitive firm's average total cost is greater than its price, okay, and remember, price is equal to marginal revenue for the purely competitive firm, but price is greater than the average variable cost, then the firm will minimize its loss by operating where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay. And then in the next scenario, we will look at what would cause the firm to shut down in the short run. Okay. But in this case, if average total cost is greater than price, but price is greater than average variable cost, then the firm will minimize its loss by operating where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, so let's look at this at a graph. Okay, let's map out marginal cost. Okay, and then we will do average total cost. And average variable cost. Okay, so remember, in the short run, the firm has fixed costs. And so whether they operate or not, they still have to pay their fixed cost. So in this scenario, the loss can be minimized if they operate because there will be enough money to cover fixed costs plus some of the variable costs. Not all of the variable costs, but some. So let's look here. Okay, so price is 81. Okay. And remember, price equals marginal revenue. And what we see here is that the average total cost curve is always, okay, above price. Okay, so the average total cost per unit produced is greater than the revenue that each unit produced brings in. So here we're going to be operating at a loss since total cost is higher than the revenue that each unit brings. Okay. But the reason we still operate, though, is because you see where price is here. Let me use another color to highlight. Okay. Okay. It is above the average variable cost curve. Okay. So I remember the difference between average total cost and average variable cost is fixed cost. So operating at this point will give us enough revenue again to cover fixed cost plus some of our variable costs over here. So in this case, the loss is minimized. If the firm were to not produce at all, the loss would be the fixed cost of 100. But the firm can minimize the loss by operating where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And their loss at that point at producing 6 units of output would be minus 64. So that is less than if they weren't to operate at all. If they were to shut down, they would lose $100. If they were to operate, they would lose 64 instead. Okay, as long as price is greater than the minimum average variable cost, then we will still operate where marginal revenue equals marginal cost to minimize the loss. Okay. However, a shutdown case, this will be when price is lower than the average total cost curves and the average variable cost curves. Okay, and let's look at this scenario. Okay, so let's say average variable cost is right here. Okay, average total cost is here. And then we have our marginal revenue. Excuse me, our marginal cost curve. Marginal cost curve. Okay. So we see here that at all points of production, whether it's 1 unit or 10 units, okay, price of the marginal revenue at each unit of production is lower than average total cost curve and average variable cost curve. So we see here that the price of 71 is still less than the minimum point of the average variable cost curve, which is 74. You can trace it here. Okay, so in this case, we would shut down. Okay. Let's look at how a perfectly competitive firm determines its short run supply. Okay, so remember, a perfectly competitive firm cannot change their own price. They have to take the price that is dictated by the market. They are price takers. So if the market equilibrium price is 151, then let's say for this firm, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, remember that's the profit maximizing or loss minimizing point of production. Okay, so let's see where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, they supply 10 units of output. If the market price was 131, then again, they're going to produce for marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And for this firm, they will supply 9 units, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost for this firm is at 9 units. If market price is 111, then the output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost is 8 units. Okay, and notice here, at the price of 91 and 81, okay, it's a loss, but however, in this case, price must be greater than average variable cost because they are minimizing their loss over here. And then if you see we're 71, for the price of 71 and 61, the firm in the short run would actually shut down. They can minimize their loss by not producing at all and just incur fixed costs over here. Okay, so let's say the market price is 5 here. Okay, so remember, price is also equal to marginal revenue. And so they will produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. In this case, it's E. And if price is at P4, remember marginal revenue also equals P4. And wherever marginal cost is, that is what determines their output. And then so on. Okay. Okay, and so we see here is that supply for a perfectly competitive firm in the short run is the marginal cost curve. Okay, because whatever price that they have to take, okay, the output they supply will be determined by the marginal cost. So the price is the marginal revenue, and to maximize profit or minimize loss, they will then operate or supply output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So this is why the supply curve in the short run for a perfectly competitive firm is the marginal cost curve. Okay. Okay, and let's look at the same scenario and add in some curves here. So let's say average variable cost curve is here. And then we have average total cost over here. Okay, meant to have this in blue, but this is the marginal cost curve, or as we know it, the supply curve. Okay, so if we're at price level 1 and we were here at A, okay, the firm would not operate at all. It would shut down because price here is below the minimum average variable cost. So the firm would not supply anything here. If we were at price 2, okay, the firm would operate here to minimize its loss, and the same is true for price 3. Okay. Break even would be at point D because price equals average total cost at its minimum. So the break even point would be here, it would be 0 profit. And then positive profit would be if price were above P4. So let's say it were P5, then over here they would be earning an economic profit. Okay, so here's a little chart with 3 production questions that can help output determinations for perfectly competitive firms in the short run. Should the firm produce? If the price is equal to or greater than minimum average variable cost, then the firm will have a positive economic profit, or at least the losses will be minimized in this case. And the firm should produce at the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. At this quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, profit is either maximized or loss is minimized. Will production result in economic profit? Yes, it will if price is higher than the average total cost. Okay, so before we looked at just one perfectly competitive firm, but again, a market is a group of buyers and sellers. So here we have a group of sellers. So let's say, okay, there's 1,000 firms. Okay. So each of these 1,000 firms, if product price was 151, okay, they would supply 10 units each. So total quantity supplied is 10,000. Okay. And so on. Okay. And then we have the market demand here for each of the prices. So for example, at 151, the total quantity demanded by consumers is 4,000. At 131, it's 6,000, and then so on. Okay, so on the left, we have a single firm. And on the right, we have the entire industry. So all 1,000 firms. Okay. Okay, so we have marginal cost over here. Since it's a positive economic profit, then average total cost is going to be below the price, and average variable cost, okay, below average total cost. Remember, average total cost includes fixed costs. Average variable cost is just variable cost, and the difference between these two is fixed cost. Okay, so we see here that where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, okay, it's greater than average total cost, so it's earning an economic profit. So if all firms are operating that way, okay, then remember, output is 8. So if there's 1,000 firms producing 8 units each, then the industry output would be 8,000. We have demand here, and we have supply here. So this would be the sum over here of each individual single firm's marginal cost or supply curve here to get the industry supply and the industry demand. You know, conventional economics would say if a firm is earning a loss in the short run, then they would exit the industry in the long run, but that doesn't necessarily have to happen, they can get back into business. And a perfect example of this is what's going on with oil right now. Oil prices are very low. And so a lot of firms have shut down production, but they have not exited the industry yet. They're waiting for oil prices to rise back up so that way they can start producing at a profit again. So they're just waiting. A lot of these firms are just waiting it out. Also, another example would be, let's say, like ski resorts. Ski resorts sometimes shut down in the summer. They're not exiting the industry, they're just shutting down in the summer. There's not as much demand, or there's just not enough snow. But then they reopen and operate during the fall, winter, and spring months. Okay, this concludes chapter 10.